So yeah, my clients doubled their net worth in just 3 years, Matt.
How the hell did they do that?
Well, you just move back in with your parents.
Wait, that's a good idea?
Yeah, man.
I'm going to need to hear more about this. Matt Robison, Mike Borton, Financial Life Planning. This is a counterintuitive one. Wait, Mike, so what you're telling me is that you've got clients and they double their net worth. And not only did they kind of, it's like dig up, stupid. Like not only did they cohabitate with parents, but you're telling me that this is like a good thing? Like this is your theme today is like more people should think about this?
More people should think outside the box of opportunities. So yeah, my clients, we'll call them Dan and Ruth. And
you realize you're okay. This is hitting close to home, but go on. Okay, so Dan and Ruth.
Dan and Ruth. So these clients, we've been working together for 4 or 5 years, and they had an opportunity. I think it was Dan's dad had passed away quite a few years ago. And they were thinking about with Dan's aging mom, who didn't live nearby. They lived in the Midwest. What to do? She's getting older, right? And so they came up with a plan with the family that she would move in. I think it was part-time, actually. She's not living there like full-time right now. But they thought, hey, we can move to a larger home and invite her to come stay with us. So there's like a, in-law suite. There's space. And so move to a larger home, which they wanted to do anyway. Get Dan's mom to help pay for the larger home by living there kind of part-time, still living in the Midwest part-time, and living in the house part-time. And so therefore, when we track their net worth, because they moved to a larger home, they got a good mortgage rate. That's a few years ago. It's grown in value. Real estate, goes up. It's kind of like the stock market. It can go up and down, but it's gone up and done well. And so when I ran the numbers, they had gone from a net worth of $1 million to $2 million in just 3 years.
Wow. Well, I see let's back this up for a second. Is this idea of, hey, let's plan kind of like this next phase of life, is this getting more prevalent? Like, is this something you're seeing among your clients where people are kind of jointly planning with their parents generally?
Yeah, no, you know what? It's great you mentioned that, jointly planning with their parents. Almost every client I have, Matt, they look kind of like me, like you and me. They're kind of middle-aged.
Are you sure you want to lump us together, dude?
Well,
come on.
They don't look like us. They look better than us. But they've got the young kids at home, right? And they have their parents, hopefully still doing, pretty healthy, in a lot of ways. But they're aging parents and the young kids at home, the sandwich generation, okay? And it's really coming about. So all my clients have this. So a lot of conversations are like, oh, my parents this or that. Either their health is declining, or they're going on a trip together, or they're helping out the grandkids with 529s, or there might be an inheritance. Maybe one of the parents has passed away. So yes, this is planning together with the parents and the kids, is a big thing that's happening with pretty much all of my clients.
It's interesting to me. So are they driven to do this? And you can use the Dan and Ruth example. Are they driven to do this because of finances or because of life management? And is there really a difference?
Yeah, I would say it's mostly starts with the life, like people know right away, like, yeah, I love my parents. I'm glad they live a few hours away.
Right.
And so it really kind of starts with that. But there's the reality that as we have aging parents, they need our help, right? Now, it might not be financial. A lot of my clients, their parents have done really well. So financially, they're, usually pretty stable. But I have situations, no, it's like, hey, financially, we might need to help out aging parents. That needs to be in the plan. Like might need some money to help my mom or my dad. And lots of times it's the other way around. Oh, they have enough, but I'm worried about them. Maybe we got to move them closer, or, what are we going to do as they get older? Help them with housing or other things to help them out. So it's a combination of lifestyle and finances. And in this particular instance, yeah, it was just a cool combination of like, oh, great, we can help out. We get along, we can help out. We can, combine some finances in a little bit of way and help them with the lifestyle piece.
I want to talk a little bit more about this mixture of like, is it life? Is it money? Is it both? Like, that's a hard thing to separate. And by the way, I should have teased at the top. You've got, for our one thing segment at the end, you've got a great quote that goes right at this question that actually is like, it's like a soothing balm on people's anxieties. It's great. I love this quote. So I'm really looking forward to you sharing it with people. We'll do that at the end. But in the meantime, and before we kind of get to this, like, you know, what's driving it, let's talk a little bit about managing this. So let's say your ears perked up at this idea. Maybe it's something you're already thinking about, or maybe, you know, it kind of got some thinking going of like, I wonder what this would look like. How did Dan and Ruth and your other clients, like, how did they start to think about this? Like, how do you get into this and sort of what's on the table as you think about kind of joint planning for householding with the older generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with that lifestyle piece. That's how it started for Dan and Ruth. And again, we'd been working together for a couple of years, and they had thought about this, you know, like, oh, my mom is on her own, living in the Midwest, still fine, functioning, but getting older, you know. Right. And Dan, and I think he's got a brother or sister, you know, that's also on the East Coast. So they're both on the East Coast, you know, the kids. And so this was a family, you know, thought. And it took a couple of years, like, hey, okay, visiting a little bit more, you know, coming out, but there's no place to stay when she comes out. You know, our house isn't big enough. So maybe, you know, we kind of want a bigger house anyway because the kids are getting older. So here's an opportunity. So I think they evolve over time. And I think it's the kind of thing that takes a lot of thinking. These are big family relationships and dynamics. And so it takes some thinking over time, but also planning and thinking ahead. None of us are getting any younger, Matt, unfortunately. And our parents aren't getting any younger either. And so they are going to need things. And so you've got to get a little bit unstuck with like, things are fine. Things are fine. Well, they won't be, you know, at some point in the future. And you do have to come up with a plan.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the plan. One thing that immediately jumps out to me, and I'll analogize a little bit from my own experience. My mother, I grew up in Manhattan. My mother still lives in that apartment in Manhattan. And I got to tell you, here's a life hack for you. If your parents are getting older and they don't want to live in a retirement community, they don't want to go to Florida, the best place on earth to retire is Manhattan. I'm not making this up. My mother has the most active, enviable lifestyle of anyone we know. It's incredible. She does so much stuff and it's all freaking free. She goes to like high-end concerts at Juilliard, free. She goes to the opera. She goes to the museum. She leads a museum group. She has a walking group. She has a ping pong group. Anyway.
Ping pong group.
A ping pong group, because of course, awesome. Right? Like this is like pickleball's indoor, slightly sadder cousin. So, you know, there's all this stuff. And the thing is, I would never in a million years at this point suggest to my mother, hey, why don't you move here to our bucolic Western Massachusetts setting, right? Right. It wouldn't be great. And there's science behind this too. As people age, being in their familiar circumstances in kind of like the setting, the lifestyle that they're familiar with, that they like, where they're comfortable, is really good, you know, for cognitive processing and just overall satisfaction and comfort. So I think that avenue is more or less foreclosed to us. So the first thing that jumped out to me is having a plan and having it maybe a little before you think you need it. It strikes me as a best practice here. I mean, you're the one who kind of worked this all up with your clients, but I think if this is something that you might think about doing in 5 or 10 years, having the conversation now so that, you know, if you have parents who are active, you know, like let this become their familiar place, their setting, you know, like get going on it before you think you need it.
Yeah, man, there's a few things in there. In fact, I love that you said she's really happy with the things that she's doing, but it's also the community. And I think that's one of the biggest things we find from the blue zones.
Community,
you know,
yes.
It's like the community of people that really adds your enjoyment, you know, or make life worth living. You know, it's really that community piece. So that's really important. And I love that you mentioned like in the city and being able to go. That's always been my plan. Like I want to live right downtown in a city where
How does your wife feel about this?
Yeah, that's why we're not living in the city.
Yeah, okay then.
But we're
So
still
that's
going
never
to
going
get
to
there.
happen. Done.
That's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Done. I'm going to live in the city. I'm moving to the city. But the third thing was the planning ahead. And actually, I'll tell a story about my parents. And they did this. I look up to my parents for a number of reasons. They're amazing. And they moved right across the street from us. They live right across the street from us. And partly that was when we were having kids and they wanted to spend more time with the grandkids and all that. But they moved when they were still had lots of energy to build a new community. All right. So they moved ahead of like when they had to. They left their other community. They were down in Maryland, moved up to Massachusetts. They left the community down there. They were young enough and energetic enough to join the church here, join the garden club, like start to meet people. They knew that it was so important to build that community. And so I thought that was a really interesting and good planning move on their part to be thinking ahead and say, hey, let's go before we have to, right? Where we can still get out there and build a new community and meet more people.
Yeah, that strikes me as critical. And I mean, we did kind of a little bit of a reverse. We moved around the corner from my mother-in-law. I tell people that she's a stone's throw away. I could literally throw a rock and hit my mother-in-law's front porch. Not that I've ever tested that. So that's one aspect of this, right? Is, like get into thinking about it. That strikes me as just like a no-brainer kind of best practice here. What else? I mean, one thing that obviously comes up for people is, hey, like I remember being a teenager and like I needed boundaries. I needed my own room, my own space. Get out of my room, Ma. Like, do any things like stand out to you from your clients' experiences about setting that up and thinking that through?
Yeah, I think it's, what first comes up, obviously. And again, getting back to, Dan and Ruth, it was a multi-year process, thinking it through, having small conversations, when they're with his mom, right? And kind of thinking it through. But obviously it's super important. So the relationship, is it going to work? The expectations, having the conversation is really important, right? Like, hey, I'm thinking, hey, Mom, Dad, it would be great if you were closer, so you could see the grandkids more. Like, how do you feel about that? Right. And setting those expectations and boundaries. And I think that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. It's very critical to really think deeply about that and voice it out loud. Because the other problem and I'll just say like the problem can be with in-laws, right? Like, oh, it's not or it can be with your own parents too. But often there is this like, kind of overbearing. Oh, you're just around too much. Like, I know you want to see the kids, but man, our life is really busy. Now I'm managing my parents, trying to see kids, and I'm managing the kids, trying to get to all their stuff. And it's like a lot. So the more you can, just like any relationship, have open conversations, around how you're feeling, how it's going, how it might go, what the plans are, I think is very critical to making sure you're set up for success around that area.
Well, and I think also, I wanted to kind of get to the sort of the sociology of all this, and maybe this is a good lead in. It strikes me that one of the things, just from my own experience, that's helpful is to establish not just those physical boundaries, which is easier if you're going with your model or our model where the grandparent is across the street, not in the house, because you have your own spaces.
Yep.
But it's also about time and activities. And it becomes so easy. It's like a tragedy, the commons overuse of the grandparents. It's like, hey, grandma can do that. And one thing that we've been super cognizant of is there are activities, there are times that grandma is doing her thing and she is not available. And I think that does get to one of the interesting things that when you suggested you wanted to talk about this, my mind immediately went to an article I read in The Atlantic recently from Derek Thompson about the 67-hour rule. 67. And what he found, based on economic data, is that that's the median work week for couples in the US, 67 hours, not inside the house. I'm not talking about like you're doing the laundry, you're taking it, just like paid work. And it hasn't shifted in like over 100 years. And what has shifted is it used to be more men. Well, it used to be that we all worked on farms, like 50% of the population worked on farms in the 1880s. And then slowly we moved to a more industrialized model. Men were disproportionately working out of the house. And then as we got into the 60s and 70s, women entered the paid workforce. But what started to happen was it didn't change the overall amount of stuff, of work that we needed to get done in our lives, not where we drew our paycheck, but in our lives. And so we've sort of settled into, there seems to be something about around that number of hours. That's what is sustainable. And yet, so now we have in many households, two parents going to work or in the workforce in some way, but the same aggregate amount of stuff that needs to get done. And, we've sort of, I think, solved for it. I mean, not to quote Hillary Clinton and all here, but it does kind of take a village. And I think we're going to find more and more couples like Dan and Ruth, or like you and me, where you need to think more as kind of like a family enterprise of like, there's a total amount that we need to do. And you jumped off into the Dan and Ruth story from, hey, it doubled their net worth. And that's great. I'm happy for them. But I imagine that the biggest dividend from this isn't financial. It's management of the overall pie of all the things that they have to get done in their lives.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I hope that, it's funny. I hope that we do get back to more of that. Part of the challenge of parenthood over the last decades has been moving away from the family. Like, we've followed our jobs. We can move anywhere we want. You can get low cost flights, right? And so there's been a great migration of like, well, I grew up in this town, but I don't need to stay here, and that wasn't the case, early on. So now you've got all these parents raising kids far away from the community where they grew up, and raising the kids is now on those two people. Two people are the sole influence and responsible for all the time and effort and everything else of raising kids. And I think that's a tragedy as well, that it is better, for the kids and the parents to have a much more communal approach to raising kids. So, I hope we can get back to more of that, and maybe a little bit forced on us with, our lack of hours.
All right. So 2 of the 3 words in the title of the show are financial and planning. So I do want to talk a little bit more about the financial planning piece of this from a strictly financial standpoint. Are there any other steps, like you're thinking about this, about somehow like either the next door model or the, hey, let's all be in the same house model? From a financial standpoint, anything you need to do in advance there?
Yeah, again, I think it's more just having the open conversations, right, around expectations. So in this case, Dan and Ruth couldn't afford they wanted a larger home because they have growing kids. They wanted a bigger place, but they couldn't really afford it without some help. And so they talked to Dan's mom. She's willing to, she's pretty financially well off. So she's willing to put in some money on the mortgage. And I think also split 50-50, the same amount she was paying the mortgage, she paid to her other son, so Dan's brother, right? So it was obviously having those conversations. Hey, I want to be fair to both my sons. If I'm helping, one pay for this mortgage, I'm going to help the other. So having those conversations up front, making sure, people are on the same page. There's specifics. Those are gifts. So from a financial perspective, there's gift rules. If you're paying, someone else's mortgage, if they own the whole home, then that's a gift to that person. So you got to be careful about those kinds of rules. You could split the home and actually own it, outright, like 50-50. They didn't do that in this case. They kept it kind of simple. There are things to consider financially, but again, I think it really starts with having open and clear communication, and then coming up with a plan. Like, hey, can we afford this home? Right? What happens if something happens to Dan's mom and now they're stuck with this big home and big mortgage? Well, luckily there's going to be some inheritance that can help offset that. So just thinking through those situations. So risk management, you don't want to be stuck with a large asset. How's the budget going to work? But really being clear about that, with all parties. That's the most important thing.
I can't help noticing you sent me a little piece of data in advance. It looks to me, and maybe I'm reading maps wrong, looks to me like this is not only a phenomenon in the US, but it's like a Southern phenomenon, like starkly, like above average percent of people living with grandchildren. And you could draw it, it's like the Mason-Dixon line. It's amazing. Why, Mike?
Yeah, I have no idea. This was fascinating. I did a little research ahead, and about 3 to 4% of kids under the age of 18 live with their grandparents. So in other words, grandparents are in the home of maybe 3.5% of minors that are living in the home. And then, they had this is from the Census Bureau from 2021, I think. And yeah, they say they can do it by state, right? And so we'll put it in the show notes, but it's pretty interesting that like in the South, there's a lot more of this going on. And I think it goes back to, the migration I was talking about before. Lots of people move, but there's lots of areas where they don't. And maybe that's more in the South. And of course, if we did this in other countries, I think the stat would be way higher than 3.5%.
Yeah, right.
And so that's what I mean about other countries, other communities, have different ways of living and going about this. And I think it's been a real strain, on parents over the last 20 years.
Well, absolutely. And I look at this map and my Occam's razor of it is like, what happens as people age? They want to retire where it's warm. If you already live someplace where it's warm, you're probably staying. If you don't, you might be moving. And hence, you're just going to have more grandparents around in the southern states, hence more likelihood of living with. That's my guess, but what am I, a demographer? All right. I do want to get to your closing quote. It's uncanny how this is something that you came up with. You came across weeks ago, right? You didn't plan for this to kind of converge with today's episode, but it does. It really, really does. Before we get to it, anything else you want to talk about, just kind of like any other specifics, nuggets about this idea of kind of home hacking and moving in with parents?
No, I think we covered it really well. But the one thing just leave you with is thinking outside the box. When you've got parents and you've got kids and you're thinking about the future and how those aging parents are going to integrate with your life or what kind of life they want, just be aware of like the different options. We often get stuck in the way that we were raised or what happened when we were growing up. That's the way it is, but there's lots of ways of living. So don't get stuck in that. Think a little bit outside the box. There's lots of opportunities. Find the ones that are going to make sense for your family.
I mean, in my case, my childhood was spent in the New York City of the 1970s. It was like in that documentary, Escape from New York. So I don't necessarily need to replicate that in my adulthood.
That's right.
Speaking of replicating experiences in your adulthood, lay this quote on us, man.
All right. So this is the one thing. We're doing this new little segment at the end here. This is a quote by James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. And he's got an amazing newsletter. Definitely recommend signing up for the newsletter. And here's the quote. If you already live a comfortable life, then choosing to make more money but live a worse daily life is a bad trade. And yet we talk ourselves into it all the time. We take promotions that pay more, but swallow our free time. We already have a successful business, but we break ourselves trying to make it even more successful. Too much focus on wealth, not enough focus on lifestyle.
There's this Peanuts comic strip from 50 years ago where someone asks Charlie Brown, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, ridiculously happy. That's a really great objective. I mean, it is true that like many people, I suffer from the disease of more. It's what Pat Riley, the NBA coach, called the disease of more. You got 2 championships. Now you got a 3-peat. And it's great to be ambitious. It's great to have goals. And look, if you're a basketball player, then winning the championship, that's you play to win the game. I get it. But in life, I'm not sure that you play by the same set of rules. And that quote makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. I'll leave you with this because I love the way you just said that around the basketball. And it reminds me of yet another quotes that I've been hearing is, what game are you playing? So think about that. Like, what game are you playing? And is it the right game?
Right. Well, it really is the difference. What in Daniel Kahneman, the behavioral economist, his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he did a great TED talk about this. You could look it up. It's on YouTube. And he talks about the difference between your lived experience and your remembered experience. And, he gives an example of like a cruise he took to Antarctica. And he said, this is a memory that I kind of dust off like an object and I consume every so often, approximately never. And really, one of the points of acquiring wealth is you project forward to the idea of, oh, I will make memories, I will have experiences like that will be objects that I will have. See, it's like a trophy. I will have accomplished this. And the question is, but what's your lived experience? Like what's your satisfaction? And does it come from making more money and spending, much more important, spending more of your time on the activities that go with making more money? But I do think that an important part of that quote is the preamble, which is if you're already comfortable. We're not talking to people who really, really do need to make more money. If you're already at the point where you're pretty satisfied, you really do need to ask yourself the question.
No, that's a really good point, Matt. It starts with if you already live a comfortable life and you can decide what's comfortable to you, then, we chase this more. I think, that I love that creating the memories because that's what the money is for. Your existence is a product of all of your memories. All right. And it's not a product of, getting more money, direct deposited into your account. So this is, hitting home for me as well. And how does this apply to my life? I've just been, noodling on and thinking as well, because, I wouldn't say my life doesn't feel comfortable at any given moment, but in general, we're doing well. And so it's, hey, what am I really paying attention to where I'm spending my time and energy? And am I really thinking about those trade-offs? Or because we grow up in a society that's more. We've grown up for decades. I mean, and you have to, right? Like you're a kid and you're going through school and you're trying to do well. And then it's like getting your first job and you're trying to build and grow. And then it's a family and it's getting bigger, So it's decades of being in the same mindset. And so switching that mindset is hard and you need to be intentional about it.
All right. Well, speaking of great ways to spend your time, I hope people have enjoyed spending this 27 minutes or so with us. It's certainly been a great use of my time. All right. For Mike, Matt Robison, we will see you next time.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us on Financial Life Planning. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to and rate the podcast on Apple iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It makes a massive difference. If you have a comment or question, please email me, mike@mortonfa.com. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. This recording is for informational purposes only and should not be considered for investment advice. Opinions expressed are as of the date of recording. Such opinions are subject to change. I cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of the data presented here.